Security escort her out. The sentence didn't echo. It landed, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the polished stillness of the lobby like it had been said 100 times before. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The guard stepped forward, his shoes soft against the marble, but his presence heavy, practiced, unquestioning. Jada Sterling didn't move at first. Her hand remained on the handle of her worn suitcase, water droplets sliding slowly down its surface, leaving faint trails that caught the chandelier light above. The lobby smelled faintly of citrus polish and something colder underneath, something that didn't welcome her. Behind the front desk, the receptionist, a neatly dressed white woman with a tight smile that never reached her eyes, tapped a key against the counter. "Ma'am, like I said, we're fully booked." Her tone was polite, but it carried that subtle edge, the kind that didn't need to say everything out loud to be understood. Jada's gaze lifted slightly, calm, steady, not defensive, not pleading, just present. A couple stepped in behind her then, well-dressed, laughing softly, their rolling luggage gliding effortlessly across the floor. The receptionist's posture changed instantly. Shoulders relaxed. Smile widened. "Welcome to the Sterling Grand," she said warmly, fingers already moving across the keyboard. A room key slid across the counter within seconds. No hesitation. No questions. Jada watched the exchange without turning her head, her reflection faintly visible in the glossy surface of the marble column beside her. For a brief moment, the only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the soft ding of the elevator doors opening in the distance. The guard cleared his throat gently, as if to remind her of his presence. "Ma'am," he said, not unkindly but firm. "Enough." Jada finally stepped back, just one step, her shoes making a soft, measured sound against the floor. The glass doors behind her slid open with a whisper, letting in a breath of cool evening air, carrying the faint scent of rain and city asphalt. She paused right at the threshold, not looking back at the desk, not at the guard, not at anyone. Just the reflection again, this time in the glass. For a second, it almost looked like she didn't belong there, like they had decided that for her. Then her hand slipped slowly into the pocket of her coat, fingers brushing against something small, familiar. She pulled out her phone. No rush, no tension, just quiet certainty. Her thumb hovered over the screen for half a second before dialing. She lifted it to her ear, her voice low, steady, almost gentle. "Hi, it's Jada. I just arrived." A pause, the kind that didn't need to be filled. "Yes," she added softly, eyes still fixed on the reflection staring back at her. "I'm standing outside." The line went quiet on the other end, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been understood, and Jada lowered the phone slowly, her fingers steady, her expression unchanged as the glass doors slid shut behind her, sealing off the warm, polished world inside from the cool evening air outside. And for a moment, she simply stood there, the city humming softly around her, headlights passing in slow streaks across the reflective surface of the hotel entrance, each one catching her silhouette and bending it into something almost unrecognizable, like the version of her they had just decided she was. Inside, the receptionist let out a small breath, shaking her head as she turned back to her screen, her voice dropping into a casual murmur with a coworker, something about people trying their luck, followed by a quiet laugh that did not travel far, but carried just enough to land where it should not. And the manager, standing a few feet away, adjusted his cufflinks, glancing briefly toward the door before dismissing the moment entirely, because to him, it was already over. Jada, however, did not leave. She did not walk away. She did not look for another hotel, or check her watch, or show any sign of inconvenience. Instead, she shifted her grip on the suitcase handle, rolling it slightly to the side so it stood upright beside her, aligned, composed, like she was preparing to stay exactly where she was. The seconds stretched, not tense, not rushed, just deliberate, as if time itself had slowed to match her pace. And across the street, a black sedan turned the corner, its headlights cutting clean lines across the pavement before easing to a smooth stop. Near the curb, followed by another, and then a third, each one identical, each one arriving with quiet precision rather than noise, the kind of presence that did not need to announce itself to be noticed. Inside the lobby, a bellman near the entrance straightened slightly, his eyes flicking toward the doors as he caught the movement outside, a subtle shift in posture that the receptionist did not immediately register, still focused on her screen, still unaware of how quickly the atmosphere was about to change. The first car door opened, and a man stepped out in a tailored dark suit, his expression sharp, scanning the building with a familiarity that suggested ownership rather than curiosity, followed by a woman holding a folder close to her chest, her pace quick, purposeful, and then another man speaking quietly into an earpiece, each of them moving toward the entrance not as guests, but as people who expected the space to respond to them. Jada did not move to greet them, did not raise her hand, did not signal in any way. She simply stood there, her presence steady, her gaze forward, as if she had been expecting them all along. And when the doors opened again, this time from the inside, the bellman stepping aside quickly, the shift became impossible to ignore. The manager noticed it first, his brow tightening slightly as he watched the group enter, his attention drawn not by who they were, but by how they moved, coordinated, focused, and the receptionist followed his gaze, her fingers pausing mid-motion above the keyboard as the room subtly recalibrated around the new arrivals. "Good evening," the manager began, stepping forward with practiced confidence, but the words did not fully land, because the man in the lead had already turned his attention past him, his eyes locking onto Jada standing just beyond the threshold. And in that moment, something unspoken passed through the space, something that did not need volume or explanation, only recognition. The man's posture shifted instantly, his shoulders lowering just enough to signal respect, and when he spoke, his voice carried clearly, cutting through the lobby with quiet authority. "Ms. Sterling," he said, not loudly, but with enough weight to pull every other sound in the room into silence. And the name lingered there, hanging in the air like a key turning in a lock that had been invisible just seconds before. The receptionist blinked, once, then again, as if trying to process what she had just heard, her earlier certainty slipping, replaced by something uncertain, something slower, while the manager's expression tightened, his eyes moving quickly between Jada and the man now standing just inside the lobby. And Jada finally stepped forward, not rushed, not hesitant, her heels making a soft, measured sound against the marble as she crossed the threshold she had been denied only minutes earlier. The same floor, the same lights, but a completely different weight beneath each step. And as she passed the front desk, she did not look at the receptionist, did not acknowledge the manager, did not pause for explanation or apology. She simply walked, and the space around her adjusted, subtly but undeniably, as if the building itself had remembered something everyone else had forgotten. The sound of her heels did not rush, did not echo loudly, yet every step seemed to settle into the marble with a quiet authority that reshaped the room. And as Jada Sterling moved past the front desk, the receptionist's hand slowly lowered from the keyboard, fingers hovering in the air as if unsure where they belonged now, while the manager straightened his posture instinctively, his earlier confidence thinning into something more cautious, more calculated, as he stepped forward again, this time not to dismiss, but to understand. "Ma'am," he began, his voice carefully measured, softer now, but still trying to hold on to control. There must have been some confusion, yet even as he spoke, the words felt misplaced, like they no longer fit the reality unfolding in front of him, because the man in the tailored suit had already moved slightly ahead, positioning himself just behind Jada's right shoulder, not leading, not interrupting, but clearly aligned with her presence. Jada stopped at the center of the lobby, just beneath the chandelier whose light reflected in precise patterns across the polished floor, and for a brief second, she let her gaze travel across the space, not searching, not judging, simply observing, as if taking inventory of something she knew intimately but had not seen in a long time. The front desk, the seating area, the quiet bar tucked into the corner, every detail exactly where it should be, and yet something about it felt different now, not because the building had changed, but because the way people stood within it had. The couple who had checked in moments earlier now lingered near the elevators, their conversation paused, their attention drawn back toward the center of the room, sensing the shift without fully understanding it. While the bellman stood still near the entrance, his posture straighter than before, eyes attentive, as though waiting for direction that had not yet been spoken. "Ms. Sterling," the man beside her said again, this time slightly lower, respectful, almost confirming rather than announcing, and the name settled deeper into the room. No longer a question, no longer unfamiliar, but something that carried weight, something that connected pieces that had not been visible just minutes earlier. The receptionist swallowed subtly, her earlier composure giving way to a flicker of uncertainty as she glanced toward the manager, searching for reassurance that did not come, while the manager himself felt the shift more clearly now, the realization not arriving all at once, but building, layer by layer, as he replayed the last few minutes in his mind. The dismissal, the tone, the assumption, each one landing heavier now than it had before. Jada turned slightly then, not fully, just enough for her profile to catch the light, and when she spoke, her voice was calm, even, not raised, not sharp, but carrying a clarity that made the room listen without effort. "You said there were no rooms available," she stated, not as an accusation, but as a simple acknowledgement of fact, and the receptionist opened her mouth briefly, then closed it again, unsure how to respond in a way that would not deepen the moment. "We can fix that immediately," the manager interjected quickly, stepping forward with renewed urgency, his tone shifting toward accommodation, toward correction, but the words felt late, arriving after something more important had already been decided. Jada's gaze moved to him, steady, not unkind, but unwavering, and for a moment, the distance between them felt greater than the few feet of polished floor that separated them, because it was no longer about a room, or a reservation, or a simple mistake. It was about the ease with which the decision had been made in the first place, the comfort behind it, the absence of hesitation. Behind her, one of the executives adjusted the folder in her hands, ready, prepared, as if this moment had been anticipated in some form, while another quietly stepped toward the side, speaking into his earpiece in a low voice that did not disrupt the stillness but added to the sense that something larger was now in motion. Jada took one more step forward, positioning herself fully beneath the chandelier, its light reflecting softly across her face, and the room seemed to settle around her, every movement slowing, every sound softening, as if waiting for what would come next. And when she finally spoke again, it was not to argue, not to demand, but to clarify something far more significant, something that would shift the meaning of everything that had just happened. Her voice steady, composed, unmistakably certain. "Tell me," she said, her eyes moving briefly from the manager to the receptionist and back again. "When you looked at me, what exactly did you see?" The question did not rise. It settled, heavy and precise, and for a moment no one answered, not because they did not hear her, but because they did, too clearly, and the truth behind it had nowhere to hide. The receptionist's lips parted slightly, her breath catching as her eyes flickered downward for just a second, as if the answer might be written somewhere safer than in the air between them, while the manager shifted his weight, his polished shoes making a faint sound against the marble, a small movement that felt louder than it should have in the silence. He began, but the word stopped there, incomplete, because anything that followed would either expose too much or admit too little, and neither felt safe anymore. Jada did not press, did not repeat herself. She simply waited, her posture relaxed, her hands still, her presence unshaken, and that waiting, that quiet patience, stretched the moment further than any raised voice could have. Behind her, the executive with the folder glanced briefly toward the others who had arrived, their positions now subtly forming a line of quiet support, not surrounding, not intervening, just present in a way that reinforced what had already begun to unfold. The couple near the elevator exchanged a look, their earlier ease replaced by a curiosity edged with discomfort, as if they were witnessing something they had not planned to see, something that asked more of them than simply passing through. The receptionist finally swallowed, her voice softer now, stripped of its earlier certainty. We thought you were not a guest," she said carefully, each word placed like it might break under its own weight, and even as she said it, the limitation of that explanation became obvious, because it was not about a reservation, not really. Jada's gaze remained steady, not accusatory, not forgiving, just present, and the manager stepped in quickly, trying to reshape the moment. There was a misunderstanding, he said, his tone smoother now, more controlled. But we are prepared to correct it immediately. And he gestured lightly toward the desk, toward the system, toward the idea that this could still be resolved through procedure, through service, through the same structure that had created the moment in the first place. Jada let a small breath pass, almost imperceptible, and then she turned slightly, her eyes moving across the room again. Not searching for approval, not looking for reaction, just acknowledging the space, the people, the energy that had shifted so quickly and yet revealed something that had always been there. A misunderstanding, she repeated quietly, not challenging the words, but holding them up, examining them in the open, and the manager nodded quickly, eager for agreement, eager for closure. Yes, ma'am, he said, and we will make it right. But the phrase sounded thinner now, like it was missing something essential. Jada's gaze returned to him, and this time there was a subtle change, not in emotion, but in clarity, as if the line between what had happened and what it meant had fully come into focus. You made a decision, she said, her voice still calm, still even, before you checked anything, and the words landed without force, but with precision, placing responsibility exactly where it belonged. The receptionist lowered her eyes completely now, her earlier posture dissolving into stillness, while the manager's expression tightened again, not defensive, not yet apologetic, but aware, deeply aware, that the moment was no longer about service recovery. It was about something deeper, something that could not be corrected with a room key or a polite tone. Behind Jada, the man in the tailored suit took a half step forward, not to interrupt, but to be ready, his presence reinforcing the shift in authority that was no longer subtle, and the air in the lobby seemed to hold itself, waiting, as if even the building understood that something final was approaching. Jada reached down then, adjusting the handle of her suitcase slightly, a small, grounded motion that brought her fully back into the present moment, and when she straightened, her voice carried the same calm weight as before, but with a quiet finality that made it clear this was no longer a conversation about access, but about accountability. This place, she said, her eyes moving once more across the marble, the lights, the people, runs on decisions like that. And then she looked directly at the manager, her gaze steady, unwavering. And that is exactly why I am here tonight. The words did not echo, but they settled into the room with a weight that shifted everything beneath them. And for a moment no one moved. Not the receptionist, not the manager, not even the couple by the elevators, because what Jada had said did not sound like a complaint or a request. It sounded like a line being drawn, quiet but permanent. The manager inhaled slowly, his posture tightening as he tried to regain control of the situation. But control now felt different, less certain, as if it no longer belonged entirely to him. Ma'am, he said carefully, choosing each word with visible caution. If there has been any failure in service, we take that very seriously, and we are ready to address it immediately. And his hand gestured again toward the front desk, toward the system, toward the familiar structure of resolution. But the gesture felt smaller now, like it could not reach where this moment had already gone. Jada listened without interruption, her expression unchanged, her gaze steady, and when he finished, she did not respond right away. She let the silence return, not as pressure, but as space, the kind of space that made every assumption visible, every instinct exposed, and behind her, the executive with the folder stepped slightly closer, opening it just enough to reveal neatly organized documents, her movements quiet, efficient, as if she had done this before, as if moments like this were not unexpected, only unplanned in their timing. The receptionist glanced at the folder, then quickly away, her earlier confidence now replaced by a growing awareness that something formal, something irreversible, was unfolding in front of her, while the manager's eyes followed the same movement, his attention catching on the detail, the preparation, the quiet readiness of the people who had entered with Jada, and for the first time, a flicker of realization crossed his face, not complete, not yet fully formed, but enough to unsettle him. Jada finally spoke, her voice as calm as before, but now carrying a deeper clarity. "You are ready to address it," she said, repeating his words softly. After it happened, and the distinction hung there, simple, undeniable, and the manager hesitated, just for a second, before nodding. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, but the agreement felt insufficient, like it answered the surface without touching the root. Jada took a small step forward, closing the distance slightly, not in confrontation, but in presence, and the room seemed to adjust again, every eye tracking her movement without anyone realizing they were doing it. "What interests me," she continued, her tone even, reflective rather than accusatory, "is what happens before that." And the receptionist's fingers curled lightly against the edge of the counter, her shoulders drawing in just a fraction, as if the question had turned inward, no longer about policy, but about instinct. The manager's jaw tightened subtly, his gaze holding steady on Jada, but his thoughts moving quickly behind his eyes, searching for footing, for explanation, for anything that could restore the balance that had slipped away. "We follow protocols," he said, the words sounding rehearsed now, less confident than before. And Jada nodded once, acknowledging the answer without accepting it as complete. "Protocols are written," she said quietly, "but decisions like that are not." And the statement landed with a quiet finality, not loud, not forceful, but precise enough that no one in the room could ignore it. Behind her, the man in the tailored suit stepped forward just enough to be clearly visible beside her, his presence no longer background, and when he spoke, his voice was firm, respectful, carrying a different kind of authority. "The board is here, Miss Sterling," he said, not as an announcement, but as confirmation, and the word board moved through the room like a shift in temperature, subtle but unmistakable. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly, her gaze darting between Jada and the man beside her, while the manager's posture stiffened, the realization now forming more clearly, connecting pieces that had not made sense before: the name, the arrival, the presence of executives, the calm certainty in Jada's voice. And suddenly the earlier moment at the desk replayed in his mind with a different weight, a different meaning. Jada did not turn to acknowledge the statement. She did not need to. Instead, she kept her focus forward, her voice steady, grounded. "This is not about one room," she said, her eyes moving briefly across the staff, the space, the system that had allowed the moment to happen. "It is about the kind of decisions that feel normal to make." And the room held that sentence in silence, each person standing within it differently now, some with discomfort, some with understanding, some with the first hint of regret. And then Jada's gaze returned to the manager, her expression unchanged, but her presence unmistakably clear. "And tonight," she added, her voice quiet but resolute, "I am here to see exactly how normal that has become." The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt full, like the room itself was holding its breath, and Jada stood at the center of it, not imposing, not demanding, just present in a way that made everything else adjust around her. The manager's mouth opened slightly, then closed again, his usual rhythm of response disrupted, because this was no longer a situation he could resolve with policy or polished language. This was something that required recognition, and recognition did not come as easily as rehearsed phrases. The receptionist shifted her weight subtly, her fingers pressing lightly into the edge of the counter as if grounding herself, her eyes no longer meeting anyone else's, instead fixed somewhere just below eye level, where the truth felt less exposed. Behind Jada, the executives remained still, not intervening, not rushing, their presence steady, like a quiet line drawn behind her. And one of them adjusted a pen against the folder, the soft click echoing faintly in the otherwise still space, marking time in a way that felt deliberate. Jada exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxed, her posture unchanged, and for a moment she said nothing, allowing the weight of her last words to settle fully, not as pressure, but as clarity, because sometimes clarity required silence more than explanation. Her gaze moved briefly toward the large windows near the entrance, where the city lights reflected softly against the glass, blurring the boundary between inside and outside, between who belonged and who was turned away. And there was something in that reflection that lingered, something familiar, something remembered. "When I first walked in here tonight," she said quietly, her voice softer now, less about the room and more about something deeper, "I did not say who I was." And the statement hung there, simple, undeniable, and no one interrupted, because they all understood that what followed mattered more than anything that had already been said. She took a small step forward, not toward anyone in particular, just forward, as if aligning herself with the truth she was about to lay out. "I wanted to see," she continued, her tone steady, reflective, "what this place would do without a name attached to me." And the manager's expression tightened again, not defensively, but with the dawning realization that this had not been an accident, not entirely, that there had been a purpose behind her silence, a reason she had allowed the moment to unfold the way it did. The receptionist's breathing became more noticeable now, shallow, controlled, as if she was trying to remain composed while the meaning of that sentence settled in, while the idea that she had been part of something being observed, something being measured, became impossible to ignore. "And what I saw," Jada added, her eyes returning to the front desk, to the exact place where she had stood just minutes earlier, was not hesitation, and the words were not sharp, but they carried a quiet precision that made them land exactly where they needed to. It was certainty, she finished, and that word lingered, heavier than any accusation, because certainty meant comfort, and comfort meant habit. The manager lowered his gaze briefly, then lifted it again, as if trying to meet her where she stood, but the distance between them was no longer physical. It was something else entirely, something built from the choices that had already been made. "Ms. Sterling," he said, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier authority, "we can review this immediately. We can ensure this never happens again." And the offer came quickly, almost urgently, but it sounded like a response to a problem that had already moved beyond. "Correction." Jada listened, her expression unchanged, and then she shook her head slightly, not in rejection, but in understanding. "This did not just happen," she said calmly. "This has been happening." And the distinction settled into the room with a quiet finality, shifting the moment from isolated incident to something systemic, something rooted behind her. One of the executives stepped forward just enough to place the folder gently on the edge of the front desk, not sliding it across, not forcing attention, just placing it there, where it could not be ignored, and the receptionist's eyes flickered toward it, then back to Jada, uncertainty now fully replacing the confidence she had carried earlier. Jada's gaze moved once more across the space, taking in every detail, every person, every silent acknowledgement that had replaced the earlier dismissal, and when she spoke again, her voice was calm, grounded, but carried a quiet weight that signaled something was about to shift in a way that could not be undone. "Tonight," she said slowly, her eyes settling back on the manager, "is not about fixing a mistake," and she paused, just long enough for the room to lean into the next words. "It is about deciding what this place stands for when no one is watching." The words lingered in the air long after she finished speaking, not because they were loud, but because they left no space to step around them. And for the first time since the moment began, the manager did not try to respond immediately, his silence no longer strategic, but necessary, as if anything he said now would only confirm what had already been revealed. The receptionist stood completely still, her earlier certainty now replaced by something fragile, something that could not hold under the weight of what she understood she had done without thinking, and the bellman near the entrance lowered his gaze slightly, not out of guilt, but out of recognition, as if he had seen moments like this before, but never from this side of the room. Jada did not move, did not shift her posture, did not look away. She simply stood there, allowing the truth to settle fully, not rushing it, not softening it, because it did not need either. Behind her, the man in the tailored suit reached for the folder that had been placed on the counter, opening it with a quiet, deliberate motion, the sound of paper sliding against paper barely audible, yet somehow marking the transition from reflection to consequence. He turned slightly toward Jada, his voice low but clear. "Everything is prepared," he said, not as instruction, but as confirmation. And Jada gave the smallest nod, not of approval, but of readiness. She stepped forward again, this time stopping directly in front of the desk, close enough that the receptionist instinctively straightened, her hands now fully still, her eyes lifting just enough to meet Jada's for a brief second before dropping again. "What you did," Jada said, her voice calm, almost gentle, was not loud. And the receptionist's breath caught slightly, because she expected anger, she expected something sharper, something easier to respond to. But this was something else entirely. Something that required her to listen rather than defend. It did not need to be. Jada continued, her tone steady, reflective, because decisions like that rarely are. And the manager closed his eyes briefly, just for a fraction of a second, as if the truth of that sentence landed deeper than anything else had so far. Jada's gaze shifted to him then, holding it, not accusing, not dismissing, but asking for presence, for acknowledgement. And when she spoke again, her words carried a quiet finality that made it clear the moment of observation had ended. "You said this was a misunderstanding," she reminded him, and he nodded slowly, the motion no longer confident, but resigned. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, his voice softer now, "and I take full responsibility." But even as he said it, the words felt incomplete, because responsibility was not just about ownership, it was about consequence. Jada held his gaze for a moment longer, then glanced briefly toward the folder now open on the desk, its contents visible but not yet addressed. And when she spoke again, her voice did not rise, but it carried a weight that shifted the room once more. "This hotel," she said, her eyes moving across the space, "the marble, the light, the people, was built on the idea that everyone who walks through those doors is seen." And the sentence settled into the room like a memory being recalled, something that had once been clear but had grown distant over time. "Not recognized," she clarified quietly, "not categorized, seen." And the distinction hung there, subtle but undeniable. And the receptionist's fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the counter, her understanding deepening in a way that could not be undone. Jada's gaze returned to the manager, steady, unwavering, and for the first time, there was something else in it. Not anger, not disappointment, but decision. "Tonight," she said, her voice calm, grounded, "you showed me what happens when that standard is no longer held." And the manager's shoulders lowered slightly, not in defeat, but in acceptance, because he understood now that this moment was not about correction, it was about accountability. Behind her, the man in the tailored suit turned a page in the folder, the soft sound cutting gently through the silence. And then he looked to Jada again, waiting, not prompting, not guiding, just ready. Jada reached out then, placing her hand lightly on the edge of the desk, her touch steady, her posture unchanged, and when she spoke again, her voice was quiet, but carried a clarity that left no room for interpretation. "So now," she said, her eyes moving briefly from the manager to the receptionist and back again, "we are going to decide what happens next." And the room seemed to still completely, every person within it aware, in their own way, that whatever came next would not simply end the moment, it would define it. No one spoke when she finished, not because they did not understand, but because they finally did, and that understanding made words feel smaller than they had just moments ago. Jada let her hand rest lightly against the edge of the desk, her fingers still, her posture grounded, while the manager stood across from her, no longer trying to lead the moment, only waiting inside it. His earlier confidence replaced by something quieter, something closer to accountability. The receptionist remained motionless, her eyes lowered, the weight of what had unfolded settling into her in a way that could not be undone, not by apology, not by explanation, only by consequence. Behind Jada, the man in the tailored suit turned another page in the folder, the soft sound marking a shift that everyone in the room could feel even if they could not yet name it. And when he looked up, his gaze moved not to the manager, not to the receptionist, but to Jada, waiting for her to continue. Jada inhaled slowly, not as preparation, but as grounding, and when she spoke again, her voice remained calm, measured, but now carried a quiet authority that did not need to be raised to be felt. "This is not about punishment," she said, her eyes moving across the staff, the space, the structure that had allowed the moment to happen so easily. "It is about alignment." and the word landed with precision, shifting the focus from reaction to responsibility. The manager nodded once, slowly, his expression no longer defensive, but reflective, as if he was beginning to see not just what had happened, but why it mattered beyond this single moment. And the receptionist's shoulders lowered slightly, her breath steadying, not because the situation was easing, but because it was becoming clear. Jada continued, her gaze steady, her tone unchanged. A place like this does not fail all at once, she said. It shifts in small decisions, repeated, unnoticed, until they feel normal, and the room absorbed that sentence in silence, each person standing within it differently now, some with recognition, some with discomfort, all with awareness. She lifted her hand slightly from the desk, not gesturing outward, but drawing the moment inward. Tonight, I saw those decisions clearly, she added, and then her eyes returned to the manager, holding his attention fully. And now I need to know if this team is capable of holding a different standard. And the question did not sound like a test, it sounded like a threshold. The manager exhaled slowly, his gaze steady now, not avoiding, not deflecting, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter, but more honest than it had been at any point before. We are, he said, not with certainty, but with intention, and that difference was visible. Jada watched him for a moment, measuring not his words, but the space behind them, the willingness, the awareness, the shift that could not be performed, only held, and then she gave a small nod, not of approval, but of acknowledgement. She turned slightly then, her gaze moving toward the receptionist, and for the first time, the receptionist looked up fully, meeting Jada's eyes without looking away, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but recognition, the kind that had been missing when it mattered most. Jada spoke again, her voice steady, direct. What happened tonight cannot be undone, she said, and the truth of that settled firmly into the room. But what happens next will define whether it repeats. And the receptionist nodded faintly, her voice barely above a whisper when she responded, I understand. And this time, the words did not feel like a response, they felt like acceptance. Behind Jada, the man with the folder closed it gently, the sound soft but final, and then he stepped back half a pace, signaling that the decision had been made, even if it had not yet been spoken fully aloud. Jada took a step forward, then another, moving past the desk, not stopping, not lingering, her heels sounding softly against the marble as she walked toward the elevators, the space parting around her without instruction, without resistance, as if the building itself had adjusted to her presence once again. The manager stepped aside instinctively, the receptionist doing the same, and no one spoke as she passed, because there was nothing left to say in that moment that could carry more weight than what had already been understood. And as the elevator doors opened with a quiet chime, Jada paused for just a fraction of a second, not turning back, not looking around, but standing in that space between what had happened and what would follow, and in that stillness, the entire room seemed to hold on to one question that had not yet been answered, not out loud, but deeply felt. What exactly would happen next? The elevator doors closed with a soft, measured sound, sealing Jada Sterling inside a quiet space that reflected her image back at her in polished steel. And for a moment, she simply stood there, her hand resting lightly against the handle of her suitcase, her breathing even, her expression unchanged, while outside, the lobby remained suspended in the aftermath of everything that had just unfolded. No one spoke immediately after she disappeared from view, not because they were unsure what to say, but because they understood that what mattered had already been said, and anything added now would only diminish it. The manager remained where he stood, his posture no longer rigid, but grounded, as if the weight of the moment had settled into him in a way that would not leave easily, while the receptionist slowly exhaled, her hands lowering from the edge of the counter, her shoulders no longer tense, but not relaxed either, simply aware. The bellman near the entrance shifted slightly, his gaze lifting toward the chandelier above, then back to the desk, as if seeing the space differently than he had just minutes before. And the couple near the elevators remained still for a moment longer before quietly stepping inside another lift, their earlier conversation replaced by a thoughtful silence. The executives who had arrived with Jada did not rush to fill the space, They did not issue commands or raise their voices. Instead, they moved with quiet intention. One of them stepping toward the manager, not confrontationally, but with a calm presence that signaled continuity rather than disruption. "We will follow up in the morning," he said evenly, his tone professional, measured, and the manager nodded once, not out of obligation, but understanding, because he knew that whatever came next would not be handled in a single conversation or a single night. The folder that had been opened earlier now rested closed on the counter, its presence no longer necessary to enforce anything, because the shift had already taken place, internally, visibly, undeniably. Time moved again, slowly at first, then more naturally, as the lobby resumed its rhythm, but it was not the same rhythm as before. There was something different in the way people stood, the way they looked, the way they moved through the space, as if an invisible line had been redrawn, not on the floor, but in the way decisions would now be made. Upstairs, the elevator opened quietly onto a private floor, and Jada stepped out, her heels meeting a softer carpet. The sound absorbed rather than echoed, and she walked down the hallway without hesitation, past doors that remained closed, past lights that glowed steadily, until she reached a set of double doors at the end, and when she entered, the room inside was calm, still, overlooking the city that stretched out beneath it, lights flickering in the distance like a quiet reminder of everything beyond the walls of this building. She set her suitcase down gently, not with relief, not with exhaustion, but with intention, as if placing it marked the completion of something that had needed to happen, and she moved toward the window, her reflection merging with the city lights outside, no longer divided by glass, but connected through it. Her gaze remained steady, not distant, not distracted, just present, as if she was not thinking about what had just occurred, but about what it meant, what it revealed, what it required going forward. There was no satisfaction in her expression, no trace of victory, only clarity, the kind that comes when something hidden becomes visible and cannot be unseen again. Back in the lobby, the receptionist finally looked up fully, her eyes scanning the space, not searching for approval, but acknowledging the responsibility that now felt real in a way it had not before. And the manager turned toward the front desk, his voice quiet, but firm. "We review everything," he said, not as an order, but as a commitment, and she nodded, not quickly, not nervously, but with understanding. The chandelier above continued to cast its steady light across the marble floor, unchanged in appearance, but somehow different in meaning, as if the space it illuminated had shifted, not physically, but ethically, and the silence that followed was no longer heavy. It was intentional, a space where something new could begin. Upstairs, Jada remained by the window, her reflection clear now, against the glass. And in that stillness, there was no need for words, because the decision had already been made, not spoken loudly, not announced, but carried in the quiet authority of someone who did not need to prove who she was, only to remind others to see it.